No sensible video game publisher or developer actively sends a game out to die. They're in the business of maximizing profits as much as possible, and they spend so much money every year on huge marketing campaigns and picking the best release dates to make sure they can dominate the launch period, get players in, and not have to worry about the competition. It's not always that easy though, and sometimes companies have their heads so far up their own asses that they might arrogantly not view another major game as competition or think they can succeed no matter how much effort they put into marketing. That's not the sole reason these releases ended up being sent out to flounder and decay, but no matter whether they were good games or bad games, each deserved more of a fighting chance to prove themselves. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 recent video games that were sent out to die. Number 10, Dead Rising 4. Every part of Dead Rising 4 feels like a weird rush job, which is strange because on the surface, it looks like a real return to form for the series, a for the fans home run that should have pleased everyone. The sequel brought back a fan favourite character and revisited an iconic location, but it also stripped away most of what made the franchise so identifiable and unique. Though it brought back the iconography everyone loved, everything else felt gutted, and an attempt to target the widest possible audience by delivering the blandest possible experience. Dead Rising always positioned itself as something of a unique open-world game, aiming for quality over quantity, but 4 modernized the title in a way that stripped it of its personality. Throw in a lack of promotion, backlash against a recasting, and a whole load of bugs that made it apparent the sequel was shipped out with little quality control, and Dead Rising 4 ended up inevitably performing under expectations. Number 9, Metal Gear Survive. Konami thinking that the Metal Gear series is bigger than the person who made it is the kind of delusional assumption only the biggest, richest corporations can actually make. After a public falling out that saw the acclaimed developer shunted from the company and series he'd supported for decades, Konami quickly thought up a way to continue making money off the lucrative Metal Gear brand. What they decided on, though, couldn't have been further away from what made the previous title so beloved in the first place. The main character was swapped out for a no-name, the multiplayer gameplay trumped single player, and the new enemies were, well, they were zombies. Survive was Konami's attempt at a games-as-service survival experience, hence the title, and nobody can answer why they thought this would be the post-Kojima statement that would be strong enough to win fans back. When your original idea is put some zombies in it, you've just gotta do better. Number 8, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. You've gotta feel bad for the Tomb Raider reboot series. Each new entry has been stellar, expanding on what fans can expect from a Lara Croft adventure, but through a combination of bad business decisions and poor marketing, none of them have had a real time to shine. The first came out at the tail end of a generation, while the second was hampered by being an Xbox One exclusive and releasing on the same day as Fallout 4. That's a 1-2 punch you just cannot recover from, no matter how hard you try. The follow-up Shadow of the Tomb Raider initially made all the right moves to save the sinking ship, but as its inclusion in this list suggests, it was too eventually sent out to die. The new developers Eidos Montreal expanded the scope of the franchise, adding in RPG elements and doubling down on the characters and world building, but sadly, it would all be for naught. The marketing was the main issue here, failing to highlight the game's strengths. Likewise, it being pitched as the finale to Lara's origin story, which had been dragged out for 3 games by this point, didn't exactly get people gagging to jump on board. Throw in middling reviews and a release date which put it only 1 week removed from Spider-Man, and the trilogy capper was essentially buried as soon as it was born. Number 7, The Walking Dead Final Season. Like most of the games on this list, it's not the fault of the developers that The Walking Dead Final Season ended up dying on arrival. At the time, Telltale were quietly going out of business, and after a couple of episodes, the plug was pulled on the entire project, with both fans and the devs being left with no hope of the story ever being finished. Ironically, considering the property it's based on, the final season was eventually reanimated by publisher Skybound, which owns The Walking Dead as a brand, who brought on a few of the former developers to push out the final episodes and complete the season. It was a noble task, but by that point the goodwill had been sucked dry, and what should have been the grand climax to one of gaming's most influential series shuffled across the finish line. Again, there's something fitting about the corpse of the final season making its way onto shelves eventually, but both the series and developers who worked on it deserved a more celebratory send-off. Number 6, Titanfall 2. When I mentioned in the intro about a publisher's hubris getting the better of them and thinking their game can sell no matter who it's going up against, there is no better example than EA. The company repeatedly makes this same mistake and then blames the developers for it, and Titanfall 2 was a disaster waiting to happen that everyone could see coming except good old Electronic Arts. The sequel, which is one of the best first-person shooters of the decade by the way, was awesome, but it also acted as the sandwich filling between two tasty pieces of bread. That metaphor will make sense in a minute, I promise. Respawn's follow-up launched 1 week after EA's own Battlefield 1 and 1 week before Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. That would have been enough competition to bury any game, but considering those two behemoths are the top two names in the FPS genre, a genre Titanfall was still trying to break into, Respawn's game didn't stand a chance. Even the wealthiest players out there won't buy 3 big-name multiplayer shooters within the space of 3 weeks, and fans opted to stick with the brands they were already invested in, which meant Titanfall 2 sadly got the shaft. EA should have and could have done so much better, and it sucks that we don't have Titanfall 3 already. Number 5, Mad Max.
Mad Max, mate! Hey!
There will never be a moment I don't champion Mad Max on this here WhatCulture.com. In fact, it's gotten to the point where I've probably defended it so much I might have blown its strengths way out of proportion. But Avalanche Studios' take on the iconic post-apocalyptic franchise was indeed incredible, especially back in 2015. It wasn't just a great title for Mad Max fans, but for anyone with an interest in open-world games. Though other releases have since done it well, at the time the title fused its sandbox with its mechanics, making every activity meaningful as opposed to being yet another thing for players to check off a never-ending list of quests and busywork. All of that was, of course, meaningless in the end, because Warner Bros. Decided the game could maximize its impact by dropping on the exact same day as a little game called Metal Gear Solid 5. While the two titles don't have all that much in common despite being open-world experiences, it was still a pretty majorly dumb move. This was the first Metal Gear console game in 7 years, and was being marketed as being the final piece in the franchise's puzzle. And after the public falling out between director Hideo Kojima and publisher Konami, everyone wanted to know how the end result turned out. Number 4, Battlefield 5. EA, we meet again. The Battlefield franchise was seemingly back in everyone's good graces following the release of Battlefield 1. The stink of the fourth game's launch had been well and truly washed away, replaced with a gritty, exciting take on a war that at that point hadn't received much representation in the world of video games. The shooter was back on top of the world, and yet all that goodwill was soured by the very first trailer for Battlefield 5. Unlike the stellar unveiling of BF1, 5's reveal muddied the messaging, with a teaser which made the sequel look closer to Call of Duty or even Fortnite than DICE's series. And yeah, of course, there was some bad faith criticism in there that contributed to the backlash, but there were also genuine concerns over the direction of the sequel, and whether or not EA would turn it into yet another microtransaction-riddled mess. Consequently, the devs had an uphill battle from there on out, and spent the subsequent months convincing players that this would be a proper Battlefield experience. Sadly, that was again undone by a last-minute delay, and the Battle Royale mode being pushed to the following March. By the time the release rolled around, players had gorged on Fall's other great games, and had little room left for another shooter. Number 3, Control. Control is an awesome game. In fact, it's one of the very best 2019 has to offer, with its ambitious bending of space and time injecting some much needed creative energy into what's been a pretty safe year so far. However, that's also why it's such a shame that the game hasn't received the push it deserves. Despite having a pretty vacant release window that could have maximised its impact, Remedy's latest title came and went with little fanfare, in spite of reviews which sung its praises. Marketing for the title failed to capitalise on its weirder elements, and instead portrayed it as a kinda bland by-the-numbers third-person shooter. The name didn't help either. This is purely anecdotal, but simply searching for the game and buying it proved to be a real hassle for me, as trying to find the game in online stores more often than not brought up controllers and other accessories before the newly released game you were actually looking for. Let's just hope it's enjoyed better sales than the post-release buzz actually suggests. Number 2, Anthem. You knew this was going to be on here, didn't you? EA's Anthem is the biggest high-profile disaster of the year, and part of the problem stems from the fact that it feels very much as though it was rushed out to market. Despite being years in the making, the anticipated RPG is still utterly devoid of content, with plenty of people at launch asking the same question. What's the point of a looter shooter that barely has any loot, but admittedly a lot to shoot? From the lack of any proper story to limited customization options to huge quests that are evidently only there to pad out the runtime via busy work, the game is incredibly bare bones, and in no way does its admittedly satisfying mechanics justice. EA and BioWare had to have known the game was lacking in these areas, but were seemingly content to push it out anyway, either in the hopes that players just wouldn't notice, or that they could salvage it later on down the line. Sadly, at the time of recording anyway, the game hasn't been so lucky, and Anthem feels as if it was released as close to the end of the financial year as EA could get it to save face when reporting to shareholders. Number 1, CRACKDOWN 3. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that CRACKDOWN 3 even came out this year. The long overdue sequel finally released in February after years of constant delays to basically no welcome party other than a wealth of mediocre to bad reviews. It was a genuine shame. The franchise had been due a return to form for a while now, and Microsoft themselves desperately needed a win on the exclusive front. However, considering the console maker effectively threw in the towel on the entire generation after announcing their next-gen plans last year, CRACKDOWN 3 essentially became unwanted baggage Microsoft desperately needed discarding so it could properly move on with its life. Essentially, the company was going through a breakup with the Xbox One, and this sequel was the child caught in the middle. With barely any promotion, the game came out on the same day as Far Cry New Dawn and Metro Exodus, and essentially became Games Pass fodder, only selling 10% of what CRACKDOWN 2 did in the UK. So that's our list. I want to know down in the comments below if you think these games deserved better than what they got. And while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't know, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching. Please play Control, and I'll see you soon.